My parents purchased a vacation home in the desolate Scottish Highlands last summer. It was a decrepit old stone house, perched ominously on a desolate hill, surrounded by rolling green landscapes that seemed to stretch on forever. The charm of the place was tainted by an eerie air, and my parents were inexplicably drawn to it. For me and my younger sister Emily, it felt like stepping into a fantasy. The first few days were enchanting, but filled with a sense of foreboding. We cautiously explored the vast grounds, discovering hidden nooks and crannies that seemed to whisper secrets, climbing ancient trees that groaned under our weight, and wandering through the nearby woods that seemed to swallow us whole. The air was heavy with an oppressive silence, a stark contrast to the polluted city air we were used to. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, my parents invited a family friend, Mr. Duncan, over for dinner. Mr. Duncan was an older gentleman who had lived in the Highlands his entire life. He regaled us with stories of the area's dark history and its macabre folklore. As the evening wore on and the sky darkened, his tales took a more sinister turn. "There's something you ought to know about this place," Mr. Duncan said, his voice dripping with a foreboding tone. "At exactly 2:31 every morning, you'll hear a haunting humming. It moves down the desolate lane past this house, soft and steady. It's been happening for as long as anyone can remember. The important thing is, you must never look at whoever is humming." My dad chuckled nervously, attempting to dismiss it as mere superstition. But Mr. Duncan's expression remained grave, his eyes filled with an unspoken terror. "I'm serious, William," he said to my father, his voice trembling. "Those who look, well, they don't fare well." We laughed uneasily, trying to brush it off as local folklore. But Mr. Duncan's warning clawed at the back of my mind, leaving a lingering unease. That night, sleep eluded me. The wind howled outside, its mournful wails creating an unsettling symphony with the creaks and groans of the decaying house. Just as I was drifting off, I heard it, the soft, melodic humming. My heart pounded in my chest as I remembered Mr. Duncan's words. I laid in bed, paralyzed with fear, straining to hear the sound move past our house and fade away into the night. The next morning, I mustered the courage to ask my parents if they had heard anything. My dad brushed it off, claiming it was nothing more than the wind whistling through the cracks of the dilapidated house. Emily, too, seemed blissfully unaware of the haunting melody that had plagued my dreams. I decided not to press the issue, not wanting to burden them with my growing terror. Days turned into weeks, and our vacation continued to descend into a nightmare. The once captivating beauty of the Highlands now seemed tainted, the rolling landscapes a twisted mockery of nature. The house itself felt like a prison, its decaying stone walls closing in on us, suffocating us with their malevolence. One night, my friend Eldon came to stay. Eldon and I had been friends since childhood, bound by our shared love for darkness and the macabre. He was adventurous and fearless, always the one to suggest exploring abandoned buildings or staying up late to watch horror movies. When I told him about the haunting humming, his eyes lit up with the excitement. "We have to hear it," he said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Come on, it'll be fun." I hesitated, the weight of Mr. Duncan's warning heavy on my conscience. But Eldon's enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself agreeing, my mind clouded by a growing madness. That night, after my parents and Emily had gone to bed, Eldon and I sat in the living room, the only light coming from the flickering glow of the dying fireplace. The minutes dragged on, each one filled with a palpable tension. Finally, at exactly 2:31, we heard it, the haunting melody. The soft, melodic humming drifted through the stillness of the night, its ethereal presence suffocating the air around us. Eldon's eyes widened, and he motioned for me to follow him to the window. I trembled with a mixture of fear and excitement as I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the haunting melody. "Remember what Mr. Duncan said. We can't look." Eldon's grin twisted into a smirk. "It's just a story, a twisted tale to keep us in line," he said dismissively. "Come on, let's see who it is." He gently shook off my grip, his eyes gleaming with a newfound madness, and moved toward the window. My heart pounded in my chest, a cacophony of dread and curiosity tearing at my sanity. I stayed rooted to the spot, my mind torn between the terror of the unknown and the allure of forbidden knowledge. Eldon slowly pulled back the heavy curtain and peeked outside. For a moment he was silent, his face contorting with a mixture of fascination and horror. Then, he let out a guttural gasp, his body convulsing with an otherworldly terror. I couldn't help myself. I moved closer, standing just behind him, my own dread threatening to consume me. "What do you see?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. Eldon didn't respond. He seemed transfixed, his gaze locked on something outside. The air grew heavy with an oppressive darkness, a malevolent force that seemed to seep through the window, suffocating us. I felt a chill run down my spine, my mind teetering on the precipice of madness. "Eldon," I said, my voice growing louder, desperation lacing every syllable. "What do you see?" He turned to look at me, his face pale and his eyes wide with unspeakable terror. His voice trembled as he whispered, It's not a person. I don't know what it is." Before I could react, Eldon stumbled back from the window, his body racked with convulsions. He collapsed onto the couch, his trembling form a grotesque reflection of the horrors that had consumed his mind. I rushed to his side, my hands trembling as I desperately tried to bring him back from the abyss. "Eldon, what happened?" I asked, my voice shaking with equal parts fear and concern. But he didn't respond. His eyes were vacant, staring into the distance, as if his soul had been stolen by the darkness that lurked beyond the window. Panic surged through my veins, threatening to consume me. I shook him harder, my desperation reaching a crescendo. "Eldon, snap out of it!" Finally, he seemed to come back to himself, his eyes blinking rapidly as he looked at me, his face contorted with a mix of terror and resignation. "We need to go," he said urgently, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to leave now." I helped him to his unsteady feet, our bodies trembling in unison, and we hurried to my parents' room. I banged on the door with a frantic urgency until they woke up, groggy and confused, their expressions mirroring the darkness that had consumed our souls. "What's going on?" my dad asked, his voice laced with a weary resignation. "Eldon saw something outside," I said quickly, the words tumbling out of my mouth in a frenzied rush. "We need to get out of here." My parents exchanged worried glances, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and doubt. But in the depths of their eyes, I saw a glimmer of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. My dad grabbed his car keys, his hands shaking with an unspoken terror, and we all piled into the car, speeding away from the house. We spent the rest of the night at a dilapidated inn in the nearby village, its walls stained with the echoes of forgotten nightmares. Eldon was still shaken, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the horrors he had witnessed. It took a while for him to calm down enough to explain what he had seen. "It was like a shadow," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "But it wasn't a person. It moved unnaturally, like a puppet, but like it was dancing. And its eyes, they were glowing." My parents were skeptical, their minds clinging desperately to the remnants of rationality. We returned to the house the next morning, our souls heavy. My dad inspected the windows and doors, but he found nothing unusual. But the experience had left an indelible mark on all of us. Eldon refused to come back to the house after that. He returned home early, his eyes haunted by what he had witnessed, and I couldn't blame him. The haunting melody continued to fill the desolate nights, its ethereal presence a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond our line of sight. But I never dared to look. The memory of Eldon's terrified expression was enough to keep my curiosity in check. The rest of our vacation was overshadowed by bleak catatonia. We still attempted to find solace in the beauty of the Highlands, but the house itself felt like a prison, its walls. The once captivating stone walls now seemed to reverb with the shadowy secret of the town, their decaying facade a grotesque reflection of the darkness that its people. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, a heavy silence draped over us. I mustered the courage to ask my parents if we could sell the house. They exchanged a glance, my mom biting her lip, her eyes filled with a mix of dread and despondency. "We can't just sell it," my dad said gently, his voice laced with a weary resignation. "This place means a lot to us. Besides, it might just be a local superstition." "But Eldon saw something," I insisted, my voice growing louder with each word. "Something real." My dad sighed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of our shared torment. "I don't know what to make of it, son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we're here now, and we have to make the best of it." That night, sleep eluded me once again. I laid in bed, my mind tormented by the haunting melody that seeped through the cracks of the walls, its ethereal presence suffocating the air around me. I buried my head under my pillow, desperate to drown out the relentless humming that clawed at my sanity. The next morning, I made a decision. I would seek answers, no matter how terrifying the truth. I ventured into the village until I found myself standing in front of Mr. Duncan's small cottage. I hesitated, the air heavy with my own trepidation, before gathering the courage to knock on his door. Mr. Duncan welcomed me in with a knowing smile, his eyes filled with a weary understanding. "How's the new house treating you?" he asked, his voice laced with a mix of empathy and resignation. I hesitated, the weight of our shared torment heavy on my shoulders, before finally confessing what had transpired. "Come in. I'll put the kettle on for tea." He listened quietly, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and understanding, as I expounded on the events of that night. "It's not the first time," he said when I finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "Many have heard the haunting melody, but few have dared to look. Those who do, well, let's just say they don't stay long." "But what is it?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Why does it happen?" Mr. Duncan sighed, his weary gaze fixed on some unseen horror. He leaned back in his chair, his voice filled with a mixture of resignation and sorrow. "There are things in this world we don't understand, lad," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of ancient secrets. "Old things, ancient things. The Highlands are full of such mysteries. Some believe it's a vengeful spirit, others say it's a guardian of the land. Whatever it is, it's best left alone, its secrets forever shrouded in darkness." I left his cottage feeling more confused and tormented than ever. The rest of our vacation passed in a haze of darkness, the haunting melody a constant that gnawed at my sanity. As we packed our bags to leave the Highlands behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were leaving behind more than just a vacation home, that we were leaving behind a piece of our souls, forever trapped in the darkness that lurked within those decaying stone walls. If you've ever had a haunting tale of your own, let me know in the comments. And if you have enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more haunting tales.